Good morning, Chris. It's me. It's Wallach, and it's Ryan Johnston here this morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, fellas. How you doing?
We're doing okay, especially now that we have all the answers that were asked of Stefon Diggs, and everything was answered to everyone's satisfaction, and then now everybody can move on and never mention the story again. I'm
Hopefully.
sure. Well,
Hopefully.
I mean, the 10 years thing was odd.
I feel like that's one of those milestones that players will occasionally, one of the cards, a veteran player will kind of throw down on the table. And I think there's something to that with him. But look, and I heard you guys talking about this before. It was a foolish thing to do again, I'm not tisking the whatever was in the bag, but to be caught. I also don't think it's realistic to be in a situation like that and have everyone put their phones away. That's another matter altogether. But
yeah, I'm watching Stefon Diggs, and of course, we only see snippets of it. You were there, and obviously, you read stories about this. He was getting upset. Was he really getting upset, or was he kind of smiling and being patient with you and said, "Okay, I have to do this. I have to talk to you guys, and I can't wait for it to be over"?
There was probably more of the latter than the former. There was an understanding that, look, I know I'm going to come over and talk to you guys, and I know we're going to kind of do this dance. I understand that everyone is looking for answers, but I am not going to give you answers. We don't know about his on-field stiff arm capabilities, but his conversational stiff arm capabilities were off the charts yesterday. This is a guy who, like I said, who did something foolish and went for the cameras and didn't really answer anything. But I think now that, to Hardy's point before, I think we're starting to kind of move on from this. And again, if he comes out against the Raiders in week 1 and has 9 catches for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns, this is all just a speed bump, really.
Chris, do you think he's going to be ready week 1? I mean, he talked about it yesterday. He said that was his goal. It's kind of been back and forth in terms of the reporting on it and, where he's actually at. But he seems to be doing an awful lot. Limited, but seems to be out there an awful lot for a guy who isn't going to be ready week 1.
The likeliest timeline, as far as I can tell, is that he will start training camp on PUP and be ready to play come week 1. I think that's a fair level of expectation given what we saw from him over the course of the spring. He was limited, but this is a guy who was running, cutting, catching passes, doing everything other than really participating in the serious 11-on-11 drills. This is a guy who looks ahead of schedule. You guys can remember this. The last time I saw a guy like this, last time I saw a wide receiver like this coming off an ACL issue was Wes Welker back in 2010.
Yeah.
And Welker played in week 1. Now, look, all injuries are different. All players are different. All rehabs are different. But it certainly looks like, at least right now, that it's trending in that same direction.
How are his leadership skills on the field? Everything that we've heard coming out of there, and I know you talked to Pop Douglas, and that's what he called Stefon Diggs, a leader. Is he a leader of the wide receivers out there as far as you can tell?
He's the alpha at this point. I don't know if I would necessarily classify him mid-June as a leader quite yet, but he is a guy who a lot of guys in that wide receiver room looked up to when they were younger. Kyle Williams, had Stefon Diggs poster on his wall when he was small, so I think guys look up to him and appreciate the fact that he has done what he has done over the course of his career in the National Football League, put up the numbers that he has. Again, I don't know if I would necessarily go as far to call him a leader, at least at this point in that room, but he's the guy that everyone looks up to, especially, and this is something that I put on social media the other day that I got some interesting conversation about. Jalen Polk. He and Jalen Polk are kind of working off to the side because Polk had some off-season stuff that he's dealing with, and he's trying to kind of ramp back up to 100%. He and Polk are spending a lot of time off to the side, and Polk is following him everywhere.
Okay.
So he's got a guy in Polk who I know is keeping eyes on him 24/7. But yeah, it's an interesting definition. I would call him the number 1 receiver. I don't know if I would call him a leader quite yet.
All right, let's talk about Wes Schweitzer has been moved to the reserve/retired list. Does this impact the offensive line in any way? Is there anything that changes the configuration of things going into the season?
Not really. I think that he was in the conversation when it came to the left guard spot, but the guy that we've seen there more than anyone over the course of the spring workouts is Cole Strange. And I don't know if that's the best combination along the offensive line, but that's what they're going with at this point. you can roll into training camp with an offensive line that includes Campbell, Strange, Garrett Bradbury, Owenu, and Morgan Moses. So I don't think necessarily. I think it kind of robs them of a little bit of depth at the guard position, but I wouldn't say it's an overwhelming concern at this point.
Should we worry about the interior of the offensive line? I mean, I'm reading yesterday Garrett Bradbury's advanced metrics at Minnesota weren't very good as far as being a center last year. That's the reason they cut him loose. And Strange, even when he was completely healthy, didn't perform all that well. On when you're still working his way back from injury, is there any cause for concern there?
I think there is some cause for concern, but I wouldn't say it's a huge cause or a huge concern at this point. You have Owenu, you know what you have in that guy. Bradbury's an interesting case because, you mentioned the PFF metrics, John, and he was kind of all over the place when he was in Minnesota. But one of the things I talked to some people who covered him when he was with the Vikings, when he has average to better than average guys alongside him, he's done well. At least, that was the case when he was with Minnesota. And it's looking like he is going to get every opportunity to win the starting job at center at this point. So if they can get that left guard position squared away, again, I don't know if it's going to be Cole Strange. I don't know if it's going to be someone else. I think one of the things that they do like about that group, Strange, there's some other guys in there as well. There's some positional versatility. So they can do some shuffling. They can, if one guy doesn't fit here, maybe he goes in the other position. But I'll say this, look, as we sit here in mid-June, there is every reason to be more optimistic about the state of the Patriots offensive line than there was at this time last year. They are years ahead. They are just, it's not even the same conversation.
What about the state of the Patriots offense and the state of Drake Maye? It seems like both are taking off early on.
Yeah. They've looked good. Again, with every kind of, personnel assessment at this time of year, you have to understand it's May, June. You don't really know anything until the pads go on, but he has looked good. The big question, and I applauded Phil Perry for asking this question of Vrabel the other day, is Drake comfortable in his new leadership capacity? I think Drake is going to be a captain this year, and he needs to be able to get to a point, and this was kind of the thrust of Phil's question, where he's comfortable not being the guy that he doesn't want to be liked. And there's a fine line there that he's growing into at this stage of his career, where not everyone is going to like him. Like, is he going to chew out Morgan Moses if Morgan Moses jumps offside or, has a false start and, on the road? Is he going to be that guy? Is he going to be the guy who is going to really take more of a leadership role and be a bit of a hard ass, quite frankly? So I think that's the big question that I have about Drake coming into this season. I think one of the things that we saw from him over the course of the spring that is certainly a really good sign is that he's not an error repeater. He's not making the same mistakes that he did last year. I don't know how much of that is the offense that he was in, a level of comfortability with some of the guys around him and Josh McDaniels. But at least right now, it looks like he's started to take that step forward as a player.
And he seems comfortable enough with whatever offense is being implemented so far with Josh McDaniels, because we know for receivers it can be tough, Chris. But in terms of Drake Maye and his adapting to it, how's he look so far?
Yeah, he's looked good. And he's looked good. He's a guy who doesn't really look like he's having a problem with a whole new offense, a whole new offensive coordinator, some new guys around him. It's a lot to put on the plate of a young quarterback, and it's a lot to put on the plate of some of these young receivers too. But I think so far they've done well with the transition.
Okay. I wonder as we get closer and closer to the pads coming on and, obviously playing games, how this is going to manifest, because with Drake Maye, he seemed like the guy who had the tools. He's got an arm. He can move out of the pocket. He sees downfield. He just wasn't executing on plays. Sometimes it was a receiver dropping a ball that was in his hands, but just in a results-oriented business, the results weren't there. I'm wondering if the new system and the new OC and a couple of new faces around him are going to help yield results, so we just don't have another year of saying like, we got a quarterback here. I know we're not winning any games, and he's not completing a lot of passes, but he sure looks like a quarterback. We just wondering if we're going to have something that's just beyond nicer to look at in this upcoming season.
He was asked the other day too about the increased level of expectation and his comfortability with the increased level of expectation. He understands that he's going to be asked to do more, both, as we referenced before, as a leader and when it comes to just, on the field stuff. And so I think he's in the process of making that leap. We don't know again until the pads go on, but everything that he's done this spring suggests to me that he is going to be able to make that leap to the second level, whether it's an improved offensive line, whether it's an improved cast around him, whether it's a new offensive coordinator that fits his skill set a little bit better than what he had as a rookie. So he's in the process of getting better. He's in the process of progressing to become eventually to become the quarterback that you want him to be.
All right, Chris, what exactly are the Patriots doing today now that practice has been canceled? And what are you going to do for the next 6 weeks until training camp?
They're in the building. They're, Vrabel said yesterday they're running and lifting. I have a suspicion that there's going to be some sort of team building exercise, whether that's paintball or, we joked about going to the water park or, I know a couple in years past, they've taken batting practice up at Fenway. They're going to be doing something like that before they break for the summer. I am going to go to Cape Cod, maybe hang out with Dan Roach a little bit, watch some Cape League baseball.
Oh, there's nothing better than going to Chatham, my friend.
Drink a little Cisco. I don't think I'm going to get over to Nantucket, but it's going to be some downtime. There's going to be some downtime. And I completely echo what Vrabel said in that cut before we came on, where you get a little cranky, those last 10 days, because you're ready to get to camp, you're ready to get the thing started. And so you get a little squirrely, hanging out. There's only so many positional previews that you can write before you want to get to training camp. So let's get it started.
Chris, listen, little advice while you've got your time off. Before you break out the illegal substances, just ask people around turn the phones off.
Yeah.
Just, give me 30 seconds and then you can turn them back on.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a lot of pink powder where I am down at Ocean Edge. So I'm not really worried about that.
No. And if you're doing that, once again, it kind of goes back to the whole, pink cocaine thing. What's it called? The
Tusi.
The Tusi. Yeah. I don't know what effect you're going after, because Ocean Edge, very relaxing. You've got the golf, you got the beach, you got the bar.
I've been there.
Why would you ramp up? But then again, with the Tusi, it seems to be that whole cocktail of ingredients there. Well, I don't know if it's getting you up, if it's taking you back down. I don't know. So
maybe you're having such a good time you want to experience it for 60 hours straight.
There you go. That's possible.
That's a conversation we had earlier where Hardy was talking about during the bad old days. He was up for 60 hours straight.
It happened a handful of times, John. Don't act like it was every week. And, a couple of times. I wouldn't recommend it.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.